Today on Ag News Daily.
I was looking at the time into developing a product, and I didn't know what it was going to be, and fish it fell on my lap. It happened by accident. It took about a year, but I walked away from a fantastic job in IT. I stepped away from the cultivation side. I was, in fact, doing quite a bit of consulting as each market turned on and the facilities got bigger.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Podcast, and I'm alone in the studio.
It's been quite the 2026 already, Tanner, between travel and all the things coming up. So it's been lucky if we've been seeing each other passing in the night.
Oh, I don't know if I'd like to. I'm not going to go there. I'll be nice. We don't need to make any
It's a
comments
saying,
about
two
that.
ships passing in the night. That's what it's like.
I believe you. Yep. Listeners, we will just move right into weather updates for you. Seems like we are pretty saturated right here in central Iowa. We've seen an active front that will keep more showers moving across the Midwest through today before lifting north on Saturday throughout the weekend. That's going to give some warmer air and allow that chance to move in. We've got some additional systems early mid to next week that are expected to bring some more scattered rainfall. This is helping improve soil moisture ahead of spring planting. And that's a key phrase. Some need help. Others would rather be planting. However, we could see too much rain that will lead to those ponding and delays for field work. Soil temps are slowly starting to warm up, getting close to that 50-degree reading. Mostly of those are limited to southern areas for now, while frequent swings in air temperatures will slow progress further north. But despite that recent rainfall, drought still remains a concern for most of the country. Dry conditions have expanded across the lower 48, while the plains continue to see well above normal temperatures. Long-range forecast outlooks there continue to favor warmer than normal area temperatures and above normal precipitation across most of the Midwest. So more of the same, it feels like, Delaney, coming down over the next week. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that. But we'll get started with news right after this week's tip with Corteva Agriscience.
You know, farming would be easy if we didn't have weeds, but weeds like water hemp, Palmer amaranth, mare's tail, and kochia are just tough to control. And you know just how important it is to keep them at bay to prevent greater issues in the future. Our best results include 2 past programs that kill what's there and put down a residual barrier to get what's coming next. For weed control solutions and to meet your needs, visit us at corteva.com/US.
Well, Tanner, this week also marks the first crop progress report for the season from the USDA released on Monday. The report showed 2% of the nation's corn crop has been planted across the 18 major corn-producing states, which is in line with the 5-year average, but 1 percentage point behind last year's pace. And that's the end of the report for this week, but we will likely see more progress continuing over the weeks to come. But like you said earlier, gotten a lot of rain in central Iowa, so planters may not be rolling in our neck of the woods for a little while still.
Yeah, all my Snapchat connections and X connections seem to be in that southern Illinois, southern Indiana regions that have been getting some seeds in the ground. We got an update. We received a notice that there's a 2-week ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran that's offering some hope for lower fuel and fertilizer costs, but relief for farmers may take some time to see. This agreement includes a reopening the Strait of Hormuz and a key shipping route for fertilizer and energy. Analysts say this has eased some of the immediate panic in global markets, with oil prices already falling and financial markets rebounding. However, the fertilizer shipments still remain slow, and higher shipping costs and that risk of war insurance could keep prices elevated for weeks to even months ahead. John Newton of the American Farm Bureau Federation said the next 2 weeks will be critical in determining whether this ceasefire will hold and whether trade can return to its more normal levels. While diesel and gasoline prices could gradually move lower, fertilizer availability will take longer because vessels still need permission to pass through the strait. StoneX says about 22 ships carrying nearly 1 million metric tons of urea remain stuck behind that Strait of Hormuz, and even if traffic resumes, oil tankers will likely get priority before fertilizer can start moving again. So we'll have more to report on that.
Well, keeping in line with the fertilizer headlines, U.S. corn growers are becoming more concerned about fertility affordability as we continue to see the shipments being delayed, especially looking ahead to the 2027 crop year. New survey results from NCGA show that while many farmers already secured fertilizer for 2026, nearly twice as many are worried about supplies and prices for 2027. Fertilizer costs were already elevated before the conflict in Iran, and added pressure from the global shipping disruptions and trade tensions have only made situations worse. Jed Bauer says farmers are facing one of the most expensive planting seasons on record. He is the current NCGA president. Lower corn prices have made fertilizer even harder to afford, with growers now needing about 185 bushels of corn to buy 1 ton of urea. Bauer also points to trade policies as a major factor. In 2020, the Mosaic Company, with support from J.R. Simplot, pushed for tariffs on phosphate fertilizer imports from Morocco and Russia. Those tariffs remain in place today, reducing imports and increasing domestic fertilizer prices. Farmers and agricultural groups are now urging the U.S. International Trade Commission to remove countervailing duties on Moroccan phosphate imports, amongst others, to help lower costs and improve supply.
Yeah, that seems to be a very common theme, but we also got the Farmer Sentiment Report coming out of Purdue University, and we saw that sentiment, even though all these headlines appear to put stress and concern on the producer, it improved in March, Delaney. So Purdue University and the CME Group Ag Economy Barometer rose from 116 in February to 127 in March. The Future Expectations Index jumped 14 points, while the Current Conditions Index rose 6 points. So we're seeing more farmers said that they believe the U.S. is headed in the right direction, and a larger share expect farmland values to increase over the next 5 years. So we saw Michael Longmire, the director for the Center of Commercial Agriculture and professor at Purdue University, say that one of the factors that's boosting the optimism is the arrival of those bridge payments, which averaged around $35 an acre for corn and soybean farmers. He also noted that stronger corn prices during March helped offset some of those concerns about higher energy and fertilizer costs. Longmire also stated that many growers had already purchased their fertilizer before these prices climbed, which limited some of the impact for this season. Although producers are planning their in-season applications, may still feel pressure from those higher costs. So interesting there to see that barometer jump, Delaney.
Well, just a brief update here on the Farm Bill, as the American Farm Bureau Federation is continuing to urge Congress to move forward on a new bill. More than a month ago, the House Agriculture Committee approved the Farm, Food, and National Security Act on the bipartisan floor in a bipartisan vote, and farm groups say it is now up to House leadership to bring the bill to the floor. They're also calling on the Senate Ag Committee leaders to advance their own Farm Bill proposals. So short, sweet, and to the point, but that's what we've got today, Tanner, for a Farm Bill update.
That's right. Soybean farmer leaders are investing in export infrastructure that will strengthen supply chains and expand their market availability, with a recent project at the Port of Milwaukee in Wisconsin that's highlighting this effort. On March 31st, the Soy Transportation Coalition presented a ceremonial $200,000 check to support Phase 2 expansion of the Agricultural Maritime Export Facility, which is owned by the DeLong Company. That expansion, completed April 2nd, increases the facility's capacity to export U.S. soybeans and soybean meal to international customers. The investment comes as soy processing continues to grow and meet renewable fuel demand, creating larger supplies of soybean meal that will need to export markets. Leaders are saying by strengthening the Great Lakes infrastructure and diversifying those shipping routes through the St. Lawrence Seaway will help reduce the reliance on traditional export hubs and improve supply chain resiliency. That facility is expected to support an additional trade opportunity in Europe and North Africa, as well as the Mediterranean and the Middle East. So while also helping Wisconsin and other Midwest farmers, they're remaining competitive in this global market. There is still some uncertainty around what that market will be, Delaney.
Well, Kentucky is now the latest state to pass a law limiting liability for pesticide manufacturers after lawmakers overrode the governor's veto of a Senate bill on March 31st. The measure says that if a pesticide carries a federally approved label, Through the EPA registration process, the label will be considered sufficient warning under Kentucky law. Similar laws have recently been approved in both Georgia and North Dakota. Supporters say the law provides consistency for manufacturers by tying state requirements to federal label standards. The bill is aimed at lawsuits where plaintiffs claim pesticide companies failed to warn users about possible health risks, even though those warnings are not required on the federally registered label.
Well, continuing on some state agriculture policy news, the Idaho Governor Brad Little has signed a Senate bill into law as of April 1st. This is requiring lab-grown protein products to be clearly identified on their packaging. This law requires alternative proteins to be labeled as lab-grown, cell-cultured, or cell-cultivated, which is to disclose prominently displayed there for customers to see. The bill also bans the use of traditional meat, such as steak, roast, or brisket on those products in their labelings to avoid consumer confusion. Supporters say the goal is to provide greater transparency so shoppers know just exactly what they're buying. I wonder how many more of those headlines we'll get to see follow suit, Delaney.
Well, we saw a large strike, nearly 3 weeks, involving about 4,000 workers at JBS USA beef plant in Greeley, Colorado, is finally coming to an end, with employees returning to work as of April 7th. Workers are returning without a new contract after the company agreed to resume negotiations this week with the union representing their employees. Union President Kim Cordova says restarting talks is a positive step, especially since no negotiations were taking place during that strike. And she warns that workers could strike again if discussions stall. JBS says its offer remains unchanged from previous rounds of bargaining, while some employees say they are frustrated by returning without a deal, citing concerns over wages, cost of living, and workplace safety. So we will see how that shifts into the beef market prices here. And we could see that again.
Well, sticking on the beef side of things, got a good bright spot in our news for this week. Also proud to say a couple of friends and former classmates were a part of this headline. Neighbors are helping neighbors. Ranchers this week from southeast South Dakota organized 2 convoys to deliver hay to producers in Nebraska after the devastating wildfires burned across the region. Just one of the many examples of happening across the Midwest. According to Nebraska Emergency Management Association, the 4 largest fires scorched nearly 800,000 acres, leaving cattle producers with destroyed pasture, damaged fences, and limited feed supplies headed into their main grazing season. So in response, the Kingsbury County Cattlemen's Association led a hay drive from Lake Pendleton area, where farmers and ranchers donated hundreds of bales to help affected neighbors. In total, this example was about 1,100 hay bales that were loaded onto trucks and delivered to cattle producers in the Nebraska Sandhills, highlighting continued mutual aid efforts across communities. Also saw that, Delaney, the Jones County, Iowa Cattle Association, their young producers sent trucks across central Iowa that matched up with a crew that left out of the Washita, Iowa region. Sounds like a lot of great support happening for those ranchers in Nebraska. So good on those folks for taking the time and obviously investment to help fellow friends in Nebraska.
You love to see those types of stories, Tanner. They're certainly feel good in a time when sometimes you got to look for those things. Deere & Company has reached a settlement as of April 6th in a multi-district right to repair lawsuit filed back in 2022, resolving claims over customer access to repair tools and information. The agreement, which still requires approval from the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois, includes a payment into a class settlement fund for eligible members, as well as legal and administrative costs with no admission of wrongdoing. The company says it will continue providing customers with independent repair providers access to manuals, diagnostic tools, software, and also reaffirming its focus on equipment uptime during critical seasons like planting and harvest. The company also says it is expanding capabilities through its Operations Center PRO service platform, which includes diagnostics, code resets, and software updates, while aligning with recent U.S. EPA guidance allowing limited temporary overrides of certain emissions-related systems to reduce downtime in field work.
Moving on to the next headline, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has launched nationwide initiatives this week to help farmers evaluate and adopt new ag technologies with greater confidence amid these ongoing economic pressures. The program, called the National Proving Grounds Network for Ag Tech, will test and assess tools such as digital and artificial intelligence-driven farm technologies under real-world conditions. This is being led by the USDA's Agricultural Research Service in partnership with universities and industry groups. This effort is designed to provide farmers with reliable performance return on investment data to guide purchasing decisions. The USDA's Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics, Scott Hutchins, says that this initiative will help reduce financial risk for producers. The North Dakota-based Grand Farm will serve as the national program manager for this network. So it's always neat there, Delaney, to try and get facts assigned to those new technologies.
Well, I guess we can consider this a new technology of sorts, but we are chatting today with Tom Fox of Fish Head Farms, one of the owners of Fish Ships that has really certainly made a splash, Tanner, across the country over the last few years. So let's turn it over to that conversation with Tommy now. Well, folks, you may have seen this story or seen them at Commodity Classic or any of the various trade shows around the U.S., but we're super excited today to be joined by Tom Fox, one of the owners of Fish Head Farms, also one of the owners of Fish Shit, the brand that you may have seen making a splash across the industry. It's quite the catchy name, Tommy, but certainly thankful to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining today.
Guys, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So before we get into the business and what it looks like today, I've got to ask, the story of how you got into the agriculture industry in general is super unique. For those that are tuning in, they're going to hear you have a very strong East Coast accent, which I love. But tell us your story.
All right. So, I mean, it's been a pretty wild journey. So first and foremost, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate you taking the time to hear my story today and kind of the journey of who we are as a company and organizationally and where we've come, because we've really gone a great distance with this company. Back in 2007, it started a long time ago. I ended up getting my my license to grow medicinal cannabis for one of the facilities for the state of Rhode Island for a buddy of mine who had Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. At the time, I was selling financial close software. Right. And, I said, you know what, I'll give it a whirl. It kind of bit me. I started consulting, helping to put up facilities all around Southern New England. Got very well acquainted with a lot of the specialty shop or hydroponic shop owners. And I was doing my thing. And in 2014, my buddy actually had passed away. And at that time, at the bereavement, his high school biology and chemistry teacher, who I had become pretty well acquainted with over the 7 years of doing this, asked me to come to his farm and consult a little bit as outdoor farm. And I had never done anything in the way of outdoor, or it was actually hoop houses. And I went up there and he said, hey, I'd like you to jump in on this with me. And I got him some plants. I was at the time, I also was supplying people with different high-end cultivars. And I said, sure, I'm in. So we got them all set up. Came back a few weeks later to check on the progress that we had made. And we had a row that was this big and a row that was this big. And I said, well, Dave, what's the difference? And the taller row actually was not irrigated. And I said, that was the difference that he laid out. And I said, well, that's counterintuitive. How is the row that's not irrigated actually, in fact, twice the size? He said, well, I've been feeding it by hand out of the filter tanks and the slop tanks where he collected the waste from his NFT organic vegetable business, where he was going farm to table vegetables. And I said to him, Dave, that's a product. And he said, yeah, I want to call it Fish Shit. Are you in? So, and that's how it was born, right? So I went to a gal who I went to high school with. She had a really cool design firm, and I said, "Look, I really don't have any money, and I've got this project that I'm working on. I need you to design me a fish." And for you folks out there, you guys have seen the logo. It's pretty unforgettable. Like once you see that fish on, in the Fish It logo, it's burned into your memory. So she drew up the logo, tracking back to all the relationships that I had developed over from 2007 to 2014 in the hydroponic spaces, the hydroponic shops and all the facilities that I helped consult and put up. I went back and said, hey, I got a bunch of free product, just like the mainstream agriculture world and in specialty crops. Everybody wants to try it before they get in, So I went out and I gave out a whole bunch of samples. I was cashing my commission checks. I made a whole bunch of bottles, in my basement, my then partner's garage, and I just doled them out all over Southern New England. I said, if these things sell, pay me and I'll make you more. Well, the phone started ringing and it started to take on a life of its own. A year later, I quit my job and we launched headfirst into cannabis. And my main job was ground and pound. I opened up every major cannabis market from 2014 until, Oklahoma came on in 19, and that was kind of the downfall. Well, when the downfall started to happen, we saw it. We had gone through a number of the bubbles, Michigan and a couple of the other states, Colorado, Michigan, had come on and burst, and we saw the price of marijuana start to dip dramatically, and all the producers were kind of sweating, and we saw the writing on the wall as a product manufacturer and said, hey, there's no way for us to sustain this. So in 2019, we started casting our line. We did some testing in Southwest Michigan, a little town called Paw Paw. We started with corn and bean and melons, and the results were phenomenal. And then COVID happened.
So I have to clarify. So I don't think I realized this, but when you first started, you were just focusing on the cannabis market.
We were by far the most widely recognized, if not brand, but beneficial microbe in the space. So you didn't, we were in every market. We had market saturation. We were in all of the major facilities, the multi-state operators, the mom and pop shops. You couldn't go anywhere in America inside the cannabis industry and not see fish yet, at least a sticker, a bottle. We were giving out 12,000 little 80 mil samples into the industry a month at one point in time. That's how fast it was growing.
So you didn't have a cannabis background or an agriculture background. You mentioned your friend was dealing with cancer at the time, and that's what drove you to start researching and understanding how to grow cannabis.
He had Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, which is a wasting disease. So a lot of muscle tension, and there was obviously great science that pointed to cannabis allowing him to do more. And I started growing on his behalf, and the overage would all get sold back to the state's dispensaries where they 1099 me. And so I was a mild-mannered IT salesman while teaching myself to grow cannabis. But no, to your question, I had zero background in growing anything. And I jumped right into the controlled indoor environment. And I set up my first grow for him with 4 lights. And within 2 years, I was out pounding the ground, helping people all over Southern New England, consulting on, 4 to 40 light grows, which at the time, a 40 light grow was absolutely monstrous here for Southern New England. So yeah, I got really good at it. It bit me. I learned a lot about the trials and tribulations of growing inside, which you guys deal with it outside, a whole different set of factors, very similar, but yet different. And, it bit me. I loved it. I got really good at it. And, ultimately at that time, I decided that's not what I wanted to do in the industry. I wanted to go picks and shovels. And, that's when I was looking at the time into developing a product, and I didn't know what it was going to be. And fish it fell on my lap. It was one of those things that it happened by accident. And, like I said, it took about a year, but I walked away from a fantastic job in IT. I stepped away from the cultivation side. I was, in fact, doing quite a bit of consulting as each market turned on and the facilities got bigger. They went from, 4 lights to 40 lights to I was consulting on, 40 to 80,000 square foot grows, under canopy, multi-state operators that were some of the big boys. So, at the tail end of my growing career, it was all consulting to these larger firms on how to best practices on how to use my product inside their facility. And a lot of these facilities were super, super high tech, right? They spared no expense on some of these build outs. So
we've talked a lot about cannabis, but now you said you're working with some corn and soybean growers. Tell us about kind of when that started. I think you said 2019.
Yep. So when we saw the market kind of start to crash, I said, we got to get into different spaces, and we look at rare plants, turf and ornamental. And I decided that I was going to do some testing in corn and soy. And I went back and forth with the farmer in Southwest Michigan and got some testing set up. And that first year we had double-digit increases, bushel increases on, it was just, straight with and without. And that's all I knew. And ultimately that first year it was like, on average, I think we got like 12 and a half extra bushel in corn and like 9 or 10 in bean. And Then COVID happened, and we didn't get to go to any trade shows, and we didn't get to really take it to market. So we did some more testing, and then the world turned back on, and I had a whole bunch of testing in Michigan, and we decided to launch, I think it was 2022 at the Louisville Farm Show, and we made a splash, no pun intended. We got on a bunch of farms that year in a testing capacity. And then in 2023, we went full bore. We hit the trade show circuit hard. And I think that year I did 16 or 17 trade shows myself. So all the nationals, a bunch of the bigger regionals. And, I did a bunch of the row and special, but also the vegetable shows as well, like the specialty crops, when ultimately we landed in, corn and bean, just row. And over the last 4 or 5 years, we have compiled a fantastic amount of data, whether that's university data, field trials, metagenomic testing with Rise Bio grade testing. So we really figured out not only that we work, but the how we work, right? What we're doing when we hit the dirt. So, we haven't really touched on what we are, so I could kind of give you a little bit of that. If you want.
That was going to be my next question, because you have this name Fish Shit, right? Is it actually fertilizer coming from fish, manure coming from fish? Is a fertilizer product? Tell us more about it.
Great question. So it is actually not a fertilizer. We take out all NPK. What fish shit is the most robust beneficial microbe in the world. So it's not just beneficial bacteria, because we have bacteria, endo and ectomycorrhizae, protozoa, beneficial nematodes. And all of that is occurring naturally in our closed loop aquaculture system that we have here in our facility. So it's not industrial fish waste. There's no antibacterial, no hormones used to growing the fish. The fish don't ever get harvested. They die of old age, and then, they get ground up and used on our plants in the back outside the factory. But we control the process. So every input that goes in there is by our design. So we've created the recipe, we've created the process. So everything that we deliver to you comes from our factory. So there's a big misconception that, we're a fish fertilizer. We are not a fish byproduct. We take the precursor material, which is the manure. We run that through a proprietary process, and out on the other end comes 4,100 different species, or slightly over 4,100 different species of different microbe in there. And what sets us apart from everybody else is we let Mother Nature take care of it. We don't hand select or decide what's in that bottle. Mother Nature has decided what's going to grow in a semi-symbiotic relationship. We've replicated it, we've concentrated it, and we deliver that to, row and specialty crop farmers going down at about 10 ounces to the acre in furrow, get it in the row. We have testing out this year, spraying out to V6. So, fantastic testing, very low use rate. We can get that anywhere between $5 and $10 an acre landed to the farmer.
Okay, so then why the name?
Because it's fish shit. Because it is. So we collect manure. Yeah. So it all starts with we collect. So we collect the fish manure, and then we run the manure through a proprietary process, and out comes fish shit on the other end. And in that process, we're getting rid of, like I said, we're replicating it, we're concentrating it, and then we're getting rid of any residual buildup along the way. NPK, anything else that would be in there, we get rid of that. So there is no NPK or nutritional value. It's just going to bolt on to whatever your fertility program is. It plays well with everything. It tank mixes well. We've yet to find something that it does not play well with. There's no, you don't have to worry about storing it cold. If you open it, it's shelf stable for 2 years. We actually ship it in with a two-way breathable cap. We need oxygen to stay in there, so those bacteria stay alive and happy inside. We leave a little bit of residual food, so they have something to munch on. So it's real easy. Store it in just normal temperatures. Can keep it for about 2 years. The only thing we ask is that you shake it vigorously before you add it to your tank mix. Even though I stumbled upon this, I did recognize there was a valid need in the cannabis space to get a robust nitrogen fixing bacteria that also helps to solubilize phosphorus and all the other micro and macros, right? There are a lot of companies out there that are hand selecting, they're modifying, or you'll see genetically modified or proprietary microbe. They never sat well with me. Anytime you're going to take any living organism and modify it, it's not essentially it's not what you had. It's something different. What we have is a little piece of Mother Nature in a bottle. We figured out how to capture an ecosystem that was in our NFT system, vegetable systems, and deliver that to row and specialty crop farmers all over the world. And now one of our other divisions is golf. We're absolutely having a great time in golf courses all around the country. We're on, some of the best and most widely recognized golf courses in America right now. But the need was to bring a natural, all organic. So we're OMRI listed, USDA bio preferred, which means our process is pretty lean and green. We're 95% carbon-based renewable. And we are CDFA and CFIA. So those two organic certs are those are the high watermark for us. Those are very tough certifications to get. So we're certified for vegetable production, organic vegetable production in California and also Canada. So bringing a natural microbe to the market was the need that we were trying to fill. And, even though it's not a super serious logo or label, as far as I can see, we have probably compiled one of the larger books of scientific studies, comparably speaking, to any of the other microbes I see on the market. We have a ton of great data. So we tell you exactly what's in the bottle for one. So we'll tell you what microbes are in there. We're not going to tell you how we get there, but we'll tell you what microbes are in that bottle and what they're doing, soup to nuts, right on through. And all that testing is posted on our website. We don't keep anything. It's all public domain.
Yeah, and I just love the story. You guys really have made a splash, so to speak. I remember seeing you at Commodity Classic. I'm trying to remember the first year. You just had a really small table, a very small presence, but it stuck with me. The name is unique. The logo and branding are unique. You've done a great job, I think, with that front. But I'm curious to know, what has the reaction been from farmers, ranchers, agriculturalists since you now dove into this space head first?
So in the beginning, I got to tell you that the agriculture space is fantastic. I feel like I'm at home, right? And I have felt like I've been at home since I got here. Although the first 5 minutes of every conversation, their arms are out, and everybody, I'm a fast talking Northeasterner, right? Who does not have a farming background, but knows, I am an expert in my product, and I've come through a couple different industries, and I know how it works. So being able to articulate how my bacteria or my microbes are going to work in your environment was I think super important to the farmers that came to our table, right? Being able to answer any question that they've had. And look, we're not farmers. We were, I'd like to say, we were truly learning to fly the plane while building it, if you will, right? We had to learn on the fly. We knew nothing about conventional row crop farming when we got into this, but we knew that we had a great product that, looking at the prices of our competitors, we could deliver a fantastic organic product that was lean, mean, and green to the masses at a price that was 3 to 4 times less than our next closest competitor, with a consortium of bacteria that in some cases is thousands of times, and in hundreds of times, there's hundreds of times more species of bacteria in our product than the leading competitors, if you will. So, once you really dig into who we are and what you're about, we're not just a funny logo. There's a ton of science behind it, which really has helped us. The testing that we continually do, whether that's in the field, with companies like, Rise Bio, Regen Labs, Microbial Insights, academia, whether it's, NC State, Michigan State, we just continue to test and validate what we, our results. We see it in the field. We have a lot of other uses now other than overall plant health. We've got some fantastic data on residue reduction. That's going to be a real big push for us this year. We've seen some fantastic results now year over year there. And again, it's just being able to deliver a quality product from a family owned and operated farm to farmers across America at a fantastic prices. It's kind of made it easy. It's made a nice transition for us from where we were to where we are now. So we love where we're at now. That's for sure.
Tommy, for those of our listeners tuning in that want to learn more information about the company, the products, where should they go to find more information?
Go to www.fishheadfarms.com, and you can go to our science section. If there's a question there that's not answered, please feel free to reach out and, reference this podcast and ask for me, and I'll give you a call back and answer whatever questions I can.
Awesome. Well, Tommy, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. Appreciated learning more about your story and Fish Head Farm story as well.
Guys, thank you. Appreciate it.
What an interesting conversation. Delaney, what is interesting in the markets for this week?
Well, this week we had a WASDE report released. Of course, this one is not necessarily a super huge market mover. We didn't see markets react a ton after those reports came out across the grain markets here, but let's look at a quick update of what came out of those reports. In wheat, the latest WASDE report shared this week that the USDA raised 25-26 ending stocks to 938 million bushels. That's the highest on record since 2019-2020 crop year, and that's about 10% above last year's supply. So expected to see continued pressure in the wheat market due to that large supply. In the corn side of things, we didn't see any major changes made to supply and use. We did see feed and residual use steady at 6.2 billion bushels, so really kind of a neutral report there for corn. And soybeans increased crush by 35 million bushels to 2.61 billion on stronger domestic soybean demand, while exports were lowered and ending stocks held steady. So again, kind of a neutral report there, some factors that canceled each other out. And now certainly the attention is going to be moving to spring planting season and what's ahead for a weather story, Tanner.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how and where crops get planted, what we get for updates coming out of the ceasefire. And of course, we haven't had China in the news lately for very large shipments. So we'll see if we get to see some tenders come through there as well. Listeners, appreciate you as always. Thanks for tuning in to the weekly edition. Follow us on social media so you can see daily clips. But what do you say, Delaney? Should we let them go?
Let's let them go.